important always to support you as a group of the new generation. That I always think you are our future, so you need to be supported and sustained. And obviously at the base of this, education is fundamental. So that's why we're here today to discuss a little bit what is, the future of education, what can happen, how we can help out, and understand also, because we do understand that sometimes it's difficult to navigate in this world of fashion and education. So there's a lot to speak about. Obviously, one panel is not enough, but we're going to try and give some general focus on what for us right now it's important, especially in the education field, in the sustainable field, which right now, obviously everyone is talking about. It's something that until a few years ago, nobody was really talking about, and now everyone is talking about sustainability. So even giving the right balance. And for me, for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been focusing also on this theme that I always underline, that for me, it's more about responsibility rather than sustainability, because for me, responsibility is a much stronger and powerful word to make understand that it's about obviously being responsible towards the planet, responsible towards your community, towards women and people that do not have, the chance and the tools to go into industries such as fashion. But this is a general overview. So this is mainly my focus, and it's always been about supporting the new generation, for them to give them, a better future, and also give them, support, because as I said, you're our future and we need to support. And this has to be for the whole, fashion system, since we're in the fashion field. So thank you for being here. And I also invite everyone to do not be shy and ask questions, because it's not always easy to have a panel like of these professional people. So if you have curiosity questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sara. Thank you so much for that. I'm so enthused about the use of the word responsibility instead of sustainability, which also speaks to the fact that it's something that we all have to be committed to. I'm going to invite Yvonne next. Yvonne, can you please share your thoughts on this, and then and on the work you've done thus far and extensively within the industry? Thank you.
Hello everyone, and thank you for having me on this platform. Hopefully you will all engage and will ask questions that will spare a really interesting conversation for us all. Introducing myself briefly, my name is Yvonne Ntimoah, as you've been told. I have worked in the fashion industry extensively as a small business owner, being part of a corporate part of the fashion industry, and having also business partners in a small brand startup. Went into education about 15 years ago, and then went back to Ghana about 10 years ago, and worked for Ratford University as the head of fashion for many, many years, and then moved on to becoming a creative fashion or creative educational consultant, which is the space that I'm now in. I'm a researcher, and my research is based around decolonization and how to contextualize the curriculum of fashion education and the degree programs that a lot of students are on globally, and how to make the degree program more accessible and fair in terms of grading for all students all over the world. Like I said, that's my main focus right now, but my main interest is grooming and growing the design talent on the continent of Africa, and how to support the new talent and the brands that we have in Africa, and how to make them commercially viable. For a long time, we've had amazing talent on the continent, but making their work commercially viable has always been the sticking point, and creating opportunities for these designers is also a sticking point. It's not that African designers don't have the know-how or the clout to make money from their talent. It's just often opportunity and engagement from industry to absorb these students in the work that they do. So I'm part of the narrative of telling the story of Africa, and I stand by an old proverb, an African proverb, that that says, until the lion learns to speak, the tale of the hunter will always be in favor, or the tale of the hunter will always be glorified. So until Africa has its own narrative, until Africans start to tell their own narratives through visual art, and I see fashion as a form of visual art, until we start to tell our stories through fashion, through music, through fine art, we can't engage the world and for the world to have the empathy and the emotional attachment that we have to our textiles and our arts and crafts. And so I'm urging everybody on this call, all the brands on this call, to tell the story of where you come from, in the context of where you come from. And hopefully we'll give you the tools and the know-how and how to get your brands out there into industry and how to support you in a commercial way. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Yvonne. You picked up on some things that we're going to come back and talk about extensively later. I'm going to invite Kirsten to speak next on her thoughts on sustainability and the future of fashion education.
Hello, yes, my name's Kirsten Scott. Thank you so much for inviting me today. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've been working in the fashion industry for many years. I've worked for Karl Lagerfeld at Chanel and Lagerfeld way back in the day, and many other international brands. I've had 3 businesses. I've had my own business. I've had a company with someone else, and my most recent business, which lasts about 8 years until I took on my job here at Marangoni, was a not-for-profit working with the community in Uganda, developing materials, local materials for the accessories industry. I've been to Uganda many times, so the other side of the continent, but I keep going back and absolutely love it. So I'm going to talk a little bit, and I'm going to do a presentation. So I'm going to screen share. Please bear with me a moment. Can everyone see this? Can everyone see this okay? Yeah, thank you. Thumbs up. I'm just going to go into presentation mode. Okay. How can I do this? Slideshow. I don't want full screen though. Okay, anyway, so what does sustainability really mean today? You know, we're absolutely bombarded with this word, and I would argue that it, said earlier that it has lost its meaning. It's a term that's been appropriated by so many brands in their greenwashing activities, and actually responsibility is a much more robust word that has, it's associated with accountability, I feel, too. Responsibility. We're taking responsibility for our actions, taking responsibility for what we do. And we need to take responsibility today. You know, what does fashion have to look like when we're exceeding planetary boundaries? We live on a planet with finite resources. And as you can see from the table from the Ratford Institute in Sweden on the right, on the diagram, you can see we're in the red territory for lots of different things. And novel entities mean things like heavy metals, pesticides, fertilizers, chemicals going into our soils, our water systems, the atmosphere, and numerous other bad things. And the fashion system has been feeding an appetite, largely escalated through fast fashion, of wanting more and more stuff, following trends that, I would argue that trends are built-in obsolescence. We're designing things that people will want to replace and replace quickly. Certainly, and I realize I'm speaking from a Northwestern European context here. But, the queues for the latest handbag drop at Louis Vuitton, this kind of mentality is no longer appropriate. We have to change significantly. And I think the important thing to ask ourselves when we talk about sustainable fashion is, what is it that we actually want to sustain? What is good about the current system? Is anything good about it? What is it? What do we want to sustain? How can we do fashion differently, taking into account that we live on a planet with finite boundaries? We can't keep producing more and more stuff, buying more and more stuff, disposing of more and more stuff, when Earth's resources are running out and we're facing catastrophic climate change. The dominant, coming back to Einstein, we can't solve problems by using the same thinking that got us into them in the first place, that created them in the first place. And a key aspect of this, particularly in relation to fashion, is the paradigm of growth. Growth is the measure of success. I heard the mantra all the time through my businesses: if your business isn't growing, it's dying. What's wrong with staying the same size? How do we know when enough is enough? And I love this quote here by Donella Meadows, who's a really interesting theorist about ecological design, post-growth thinking, etc. Growth of what and why and for whom, and who pays the cost, and how long can it last? And what's the cost to the planet, and how much is enough? And I would argue that we've lost touch, or many of us in the world, I'm not pointing any fingers, many of us in the world have lost touch with what enough looks like, what sufficiency looks like. And one of the mechanisms that I try to promote to my students to get them to slightly reframe how they do fashion, I think I'm going to show you some really nice examples after all this doom and gloom in a moment, is reconnecting with your why. What is the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning? What is the thing that excites you? Where are your gifts? Where do your compassions lie? What are the things that you want to change in the world? And can you use fashion as a vehicle to do that? You know, what do you feel called to do that you know you were born to do? And can fashion help you to do that? And you know, this model is created by a guy called Simon Sinek, who's a leadership guru who I had the privilege of hearing him speak a few years ago at a conference. And he talks about how many organizations know what they do. We create clothes. Okay, if we're a designer, we create clothes. And we know how we do it. We buy fabric, we pattern cut, we sample, we sell. We don't always know why we do it other than profit, other than earning money. But what if there was a deeper meaning that we could find in how we make clothes, in why we make clothes, and what they can do in the world? So these are some of the characteristics that I think are crucial as we move forward in the future of the fashion industry, creating fashion that is truly regenerative, beyond sustainable. It's about being proactively positive, about giving back, of nourishing peoples and planet, futuring rather than defuturing. The current approaches are defuturing. They're taking away the futures of future generations. We need to be refuturing, about feeding the soil, growing, supporting communities to flourish, of encouraging well-being of people and planet, and thinking about this from in a systemic way, the connections between all the different choices we make, all the different things that we do, how we can add value, how we can do things better, how we can do things differently. And I suggest that ecological design principles should be a foundation to this. And there's an ecological design theorist in the US, David Orr, his books are incredible. Ecological design is the art that reconnects us as sensuous creatures evolved over millions of years to a beautiful world. That world does not need to be remade, but rather revealed. And I would argue here that traditional crafts, traditional textile traditions around the world have a huge amount to offer us, to show us about how to create clothing in a regenerative way, in a way that supports people and planet. It says here, to do that, we do not need research, by which they mean sort of technological innovation, so much as the rediscovery of old and forgotten things. And I think the solutions that we need, we already have some of them. We're just not looking in the right places. We're placing faith in technology in being the solution to all our problems. Technology alone is not the solution. It's a tool like anything else, and a tool is only as good as the hands of the person who's using it. So here are some great examples, and these are people who I think are like beacons of light in the darkness at the moment. Marcella Chavarria has a brand called Noir Handmade, and with each one I've got a little quote here from them that shows you how their values underpin how they do fashion and what they produce. So their whys support their hows and their whats. When you have certain pillars that define your life, then your work is not a separate thing. She works with this 2,500-year-old Chinese mud cloth that's dipped in the juice of a particular yam that mordants it. I think it has a high tannin rate. And then it's coated on one side with iron-rich mud. And you get this beautiful, slightly luminous black finish. And this is the kind of, and she doesn't want to grow. She has no intention of growing. She knows when enough is enough. She produces small additions each season, but building on the previous one very, very slowly, just adding a few garments. They're timeless, they're not trend-led, but they're beautiful and they're cool and eternal and fantastically made. They're heirloom pieces. Then Daniel Olatunji, whose family background traditionally was Nigeria. He has a brand in London called Monad London. Daniel is the ultimate slow luxury brand. He's a designer maker. He works with Fulani tribesmen from the north of Nigeria, sourcing his indigo and some woven cottons. He works with Eddie Doherty, an 86-year-old Donegal tweed weaver in Northern Ireland, Northwestern Ireland. He supports crafts that are dying out, much like Marcella. So his pieces have the aesthetics of wear built into the designs. So you don't throw them away or discard them because they start to look a little bit worn. That's part of the look, that's embraced. I think you might recognize the cloth on the left there with the narrow loom weaving and the stitching. Here's Daniel, and there's his label. He acknowledges the author, the person who made the fabric, the story behind the clothes. And this is really powerful. I think it's so important to acknowledge where your materials come from. And then by Walid Damirji, works with antique materials. I love that no two items are the same and that the textiles offer such a sense of history. We're doing a project with him at Marangoni at the moment. His luxury of zero waste, these 18th century quilts embroidered, incredible richness of layering. Here's some of his pieces as well. Ayanna Seagull is someone I think that, she works between Lagos, Nairobi, and Accra. And I've been following her on Instagram for a while. Strong emphasis in traditional textile traditions, works with small artisanal communities. Can you see a pattern here? And it relates to, I think Sara's particularly interested in this field as well. She emphasizes the craftsmanship. And works to preserve these craft traditions. And then a slightly different approach, but also quite craft-based, British designer Bethany Williams. She loves turning waste into something cool. So she's using waste materials, woven, reconstructed, and every season she partners with a charity, and proceeds from the collection are given back to the charity. So profits are shared with the charity, and she uses each collection as a platform to promote the charity and help to raise funds for it. So the new sustainable luxury, all of the things that these designers, these small labels have in common is the fiber and the fabric are the most important thing. And I think in many African countries, there's so many incredible textile traditions, that could be real selling point. It's keeping them alive, making them feel modern and seductive to a younger generation. Natural and sustainable materials or waste materials. Craft is really important in them. They source directly from small-scale artisan producers. They acknowledge the source. They preserve indigenous knowledge. They embrace the aesthetics of wear to some extent anyway. They produce limited editions, more generally speaking, limited editions that are timeless and seasonless. Production with many of them, of the materials they use, can be constrained by the material, by the seasons, by the seasonal availability of fibers, of natural dye stuff, and so on, and the maker's other commitments, perhaps in agriculture. And their work is led by their values. They're altruistic. They want to do something proactively positive in the world through fashion, and they're content to stay small. And I'm going to just cut quickly because I know time's out. We do promote zero waste a lot at Marangoni London, upcycled material. A lot of our students are exploring adaptable clothing, so clothing that can have multiple different uses. I just wanted to include here a project that Yvonne and I have been working on together. And actually, I wonder if Yvonne, do you want to say something about this as well? Because it's your project too. This is something that our students have been collaborating on. So the Marangoni London MA students and Yvonne's students at JACCD Design School in Accra. And her students are researching their own cultural textiles, going really deep into the meaning, the symbolism, the stories behind them, and presenting them to our students. We're trying to, I think we're all aware of the cultural appropriation, and also I would say the stereotyping of a sort of homogenized Africa that goes on in Western fashion cultures. So this is an attempt to try and stop this, to realize that every African country and every group of people within every African country have very different material cultures, very different textile traditions, very different styles, values, beliefs, etc. And it enables our students in London to kind of understand that and prevent them from making some of the mistakes that big designer brands are doing at the moment. And Yvonne's students are really learning more about their own textiles and gaining a new sense of pride in them.
Yeah, oh, thank you. So as I said earlier, by doing this project, the students started to have a deeper understanding of their cultures and the symbolism, and even down to the color, the representation of color and what the colors actually mean within their work. And then looking at new models, how can we renovate the textiles? How can we give the textiles and the heritage and the traditions a new view for the world, a new knowledge, a new contribution in terms of how it's put together, how it's modeled, and what sort of shapes are going to be interpreted using these textiles. So I think for our students, it's been a brilliant model in terms of learning your histories and the context of where you're coming from and the context of the curriculum as well. And I think for the Marangoni students, rather than going on the internet and looking for inspiration for their collections, they were able to hear the stories of the people which these cultures and traditions come from. And like I said earlier, hear that the lion telling its own story rather than going online and getting the story from a place like Wikipedia, for instance. So I think it's a model that I would love to have replicated throughout lots of curriculums all over the world, so that designers have a deeper understanding of cultures and inspirations, and then also for the cultures of the people these inspirations are coming from, also have a more theoretical understanding of their traditions and cultures, because, you know, coming from a Ghanaian culture or coming from Ghana doesn't instantly mean that you know all the histories and the nuances behind your textiles and the cultures that you come from. So yeah, it's been a really fruitful model in terms of learning and exchange of knowledge. Thank you, Kirsten.
Oh, thank you, Yvonne. Yeah, it's been a fantastic project. And I just want to mention, we do have a new MA starting at Istituto Marangoni from February 23 called MA Responsible Fashion, that is focusing on a really interdisciplinary approach. So we will have business students working with design students, maybe hopefully working with maybe environmental science students, or, you know, it's very, very open, but the idea that no one discipline has all the solutions to the challenges the industry faces, and that we have to work together and gain different perspectives from different disciplines and find a better way forward. And just this last slide, to consider what is the purpose and the function of design education today? Is it to train students to slot into an industry that has to change, but doesn't know how yet? And what is it that we want to sustain? Just to come back to that question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. Thank you so much for that. And I think that last slide is sort of, you know, something for us to take away, because the reality is the industry is currently dysfunctional. There's so much that's wrong with it. And the initial model was always to train students to sort of, you know, slot them into different positions that have been created by companies around, fashion companies across the world. So if all of that is going on, then clearly, you know, there's got to be some sort of major disruption within the fashion education system so that we can change the world. So, and the key word for me from that is intersectionality. You know, it's to understand that fashion is interdisciplinary. And if we're to think about, you know, the circular economy and the need to, you know, for the world to, and, you know, the whole fashion industry to move from the linear model to more circular economy, we have to explore systems and system design thinking. And this also has to be applied to education, where we bring, you know, the whole process can be iterated over and over again till we find solutions that would last. So I guess our takeaway is to understand that, you know, it's got to be an interdisciplinary approach. That's education from now. How do we bring people from different fields to brainstorm on the best way for students to understand what's going on, and so that they can be better equipped for the industry we hope to create today. So we'll jump right into it. I think you've all laid the foundation for what we're hoping we can take away from this today. And this brings us to sort of like the next question. So we're going, you know, I don't want to call it Q&A, more like what else can we deliberate on today, you know, while we're all here in the room and while we have your attention today, you know. So picking up from you know, where you're at, how can we, you know, when you say sustainability, what's there to teach? You know, Sara, you have extensive experience when it comes to, you know, encouraging young creators and creatives across the world to embrace responsible fashion, like you call it, you know, and using that as a tool for success. So what is there to teach? What is there to teach in fashion schools today? What I'd love to know what you think about that, Sara.
Sorry. No, I was saying that, well, I think that, I mean, already fashion school do an amazing work, I mean, with the students, and it's, you know, there's a lot. I have to think that fashion schools right now, it's not an easy task, because in the last 5 years, there's been so much happening towards many fields, which obviously responsibility, but just consider all the tech field, all the social community field. I mean, there's so much happening that obviously fashion schools really need to kind of re-see their education and how to evolve it. I mean, I think it's very important. I mean, when I speak to fashion school, how important is to really stick, to the heritage and what was before, because now everyone is just thinking forward, but please remember that there has been a history, that there is a background, that there is, history of fashion, of photography, of culture, as Yvonne was saying before, I mean, just consider all this cultural appropriation that has been going on and it's continuing to go on without people really knowing. I mean, when they do it, I mean, we have now, maybe I go out a little bit of the discussion, but just remember how many fashion houses had been attacked for cultural appropriation, not in the right moment. And you think, I mean, since they were big brands, I'm not going to tell names because we know who they are. I mean, the first question is, how can nobody has thought about it with so many people working in that brand, that this was wrong, So at the same time, I always think that it's important also to see, to get the advantage and the positive part of a mistake, to see, okay, I did a mistake. I totally admit it, but at the same time, it's also to learn, and this is also happens, I think, in education, because obviously I think now the role of the student, it's not easy because it's, as I said, there's so much happening. So I do think that a school should really try to make focuses points of where, it's important to, in which direction to go. So responsibility right now, it's fundamental, which doesn't mean that if you don't approach this in the immediate beginning of your, career or whatever project you want to construct, you're wrong, but for sure you're not going in the right direction for many reasons. So I think schools should kind of become very natural to teach how to be responsible. But how to be responsible, there's so many ways to do it, because first of all, I think the first probably manifesto that a school has to give a student is sustainability. 100% doesn't exist and will never exist. And for sure, us as a generation, and probably even a younger generation, would never see this happening, because as the world is, formed and the consumption and all, social and political aspects, it's impossible to be sustainable 100%. And I think the important thing is, how to improve, and how everyone here in our room doing, actions every day can really make the difference. So I think this is very important, because if not, students think, okay, if I'm not sustainable 100%, or if I cannot manage to give a sustainable, message immediately, I'm doing something wrong. It's not right. I mean, there's a balance to get there. So I think this is important. And as Kirsten was saying in her presentation, she did beautiful examples of designers such as Bethany, that, I mean, she now has the label of being kind of a sustainable designer, but I think she's a responsible designer, because I met her at the beginning of her career, and she was one of the first to think about the community around her, to work with women or people that have been in jail, or the fact of a smaller, community that didn't have access to education, or to the fact of wanting to work in fashion but didn't know how to reach. So I think this is a beautiful example of how to be responsible, and this is responsible towards the community, which then becomes also towards the planet, because then there is all this upcycling and recycling aspect of her collection. And also an example that it could be fashion, it could not even be fashion, because then Bethany has, some aspects of her work which is almost art rather than, wearable fashion. So I think this is something that schools should kind of teach to students, that you don't have to go out from a fashion school and be a fashion designer, but be someone that wants really to envision and change something in the world where they're living. And this is, I mean, we work all in a very beautiful creative field. I mean, fashion teaches us that we can be anything and anyone. I mean, that's the beautiful part of it. The difficult part of it, of how to do it and how to do it in the right way, because then, the cultural appropriation, I think it's a mistake doing it, but it's more a mistake not understanding what does it mean, cultural appropriation. I mean, I'm learning it every day, because through, the scouting and traveling, and what I love about my work, it's, meet the designers, to meet the creatives, and at the same time learn from them, because obviously I meet designers from all over the world that come from different parts of tradition countries. So every time it's like, absorbing. So I feel like a vampire. I love working with young people, because then in a way they're teaching me. They think that I'm teaching them, but they're teaching me too. So, and I think this is very important. So, and also another thing, it's about slow. I mean, everyone talks about slow fashion, which doesn't mean anything right now, but going slow. I mean, we are not in a rush. It's about quality, not quantity. So I think this is what school should teach. I mean, I know it's more a philosophical way of doing things, but I think a student between 18 and 25 are very confused. They change idea very quickly. So they need to have pillars where, to show. So I think this is what school should do. And one thing I would also add, because I was talking to a school last week, and this goes out a little bit more from, is that then I see so many designers coming, I see the collection, and there's so many of them, I mean, mostly of them, that do not have the slightest idea of how to construct the label, meaning they have all the creative part, but they don't have the practical part of, doing a contract or liaising themselves with a showroom and all of that. So this, I know it's a lot of information, but at least to have a base, because there's so many designers that after maybe 2 years, they close down. And I think it's not because their collection wasn't working, but because they didn't have, the insights or the tools of how to keep it going on. So, I mean, I think fashion school have a lot to do, but they're already doing a lot. But for sure, stick at least to 2 or 3 pillars, which are fundamental. I mean, you cannot do everything. So at least have a focus on 2 or 3 pillars. So this, I think I'm not saying it's missing, it's adding up. Because as I said, and then I finish it here. Like for me now, the metaverse, virtual fashion, NFT, Bitcoins, I don't want to know about it. I mean, for me, it's like a big, big headache. I mean, it's fascinating, but at the same time, it's already complicated real life. Why do I need to also, live in a virtual life? We have to talk about it because this is happening. But at the same time, I always say, it's so important what happened before, the history, the heritage, because then the heritage is the exchange of, of generations. Look at the big brands. Most brands do not have the new generation, which doesn't mean that if you don't have a child that wants to do your same job, you have to close down. It's about heritage, even with other people, which is not your family. So I think this is extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sara, for that. We're going to come back as well to the topic of heritage and traditional crafts and textiles. Yvonne and Kirsten, I don't know who wants to add to that on, responsibility or sustainability. What is there to teach? Is there anything else you want to share or add to the conversation?
You go first.
I just want to pick up on the idea of slow fashion and business. I think business being incorporated within the curriculum is something that we're always working towards as, educators in the fashion industry. I was trying to always put the students within fashion organizations, especially in Ghana, for them to see the practical aspects of what we're learning, for them to see how it actually works on the ground. I think it's very important for us to incorporate like work experience and internships. And one thing I would say to any business owners who are on the call is to embrace students and be kind to students. I hear a lot of stories of when my students go on internships, and the stories that they come back, it's like they're not wanted, and people begrudge them of learning from their organizations. And for a student who wants to set up their own brand, it's absolutely crucial and essential, as Sara was saying, for them to have that on the ground knowledge. And if it's not welcoming, if industry do not embrace the students who are going into their organizations, it makes it very difficult for that student to acquire the knowledge that's needed. So that's one thing that I feel very strongly about, and I'm really glad you brought that point home to everybody on this call.
I wanted to say, I think it's never been more important for students to find their own identity and to really develop and express that in the most powerful way as designers. The market is really saturated, it's highly competitive, and there's an awful lot, even at designer level on the catwalks, not just commercial design, that looks, you can barely distinguish one designer's collection from another quite often. You know, they're the people who stand out, but there's a lot of sameness. I feel everyone's looking at the same trend forecasting websites instead of finding their own narrative in their work, developing their own techniques and skills. I love to see someone like Ntimoah, who's obsessed with the pleat and really takes it in every possible direction he can think of, or someone like Rick Owens, who's just developed his own approach through creative pattern cutting, I guess. It's finding your voice, visual voice as a designer, so you have a sort of unique style and a longevity, and not buying into seasonal trends, not following trends, just creating an identity. Technical skills are really needed to advance technical skills. We can go into the digital, of course, but there has to be a good, solid platform of practical skills underpinning that, or there's a big gap in knowledge. Principles that support life. So how can you, so zero waste, reuse, slow, all really important things, upcycling, good role models, examples of practitioners, and they tend to be the small independent brands that are doing things right. And, you know, we've been doing projects with small independents who have really strong values. So Monad London, for example, Phoebe English, by Waleed, those are brands that we collaborate with for student projects. Small, showing them what a small business for them might look like, where they have control over more aspects of what happens. And I hear what the other panelists have said about business, understanding of business being important, but I think designers have so much to learn and to develop to get their skills really to that, so they have a real competitive advantage. So what we've done at Marangoni London is have a sort of business boot camp in the summer after they've graduated for 2 or 3 weeks, which is all about things like range planning for a particular market, marketing skills, of course, we cover a bit of that anyway, business planning, funding, approaching buyers, trade fairs, and they have to pitch a business plan that they create to a dragon's den, a panel of industry people at the end of this boot camp. We call it business incubator, but it's kind of a boot camp. And I think that allows them to really focus on developing their creativity. Yes, checking it against market context to some extent. Absolutely, that's important. But then they really focus on how are they going to launch their label after they've, you know, developed those skills to a good level. And work experience, as Yvonne was saying, absolutely crucial. So they have a reality check. But we want to change that reality, of course.
Thank you very much. And of course, I think you've touched on this several times, but when we explore the concepts of modernizing traditional crafts and textiles, or modernizing our heritage, or should I say our heritage of craftsmanship, not just across the continent, but, you know, quite a few countries in the global south, I guess, you know, what are your thoughts on this? You know, because I mean, we all agree, I think, in this group that for some of these creators, the best way forward is to stay small, because, you know, and staying small means, you know, you're ensuring that your supply chain remains transparent, traceable, and so many other things, you know. So how do you balance that? How do you advise brands who are artisanal in nature, like the Seagulls of this world, what should growth mean to them, I guess, so how do they modernize, or how do they modernize some of their approach to creation in a world where things seem to be moving at a fast pace? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that? And how do you teach that, I guess?
I think I noticed one of my ex-students is in the room, Jun Nakamura, who actually did his dissertation from Japan. He actually did his dissertation project on shibori as a shape-making process rather than just for dyeing. He uses synthetic materials because it holds the little lumpy shapes, a bit Miyake-ish, I guess, but not. But that's something, allowing students to explore aspects of their own cultural heritage and experiment, play, extend, and find new ways of working with it. If it's not from your own culture, then I think consultation, it's important to touch base with if you can, with the community of origin to make sure you're working in a respectful way. I'm sure others have got more to say.
Yeah. I think like Kirsten was saying, the collaboration that we had, what really brought home for the students in Accra was that their traditions and their cultures that had so much meaning, and it was so much more in depth than they actually thought from the surface, that having that time to reflect and look upon it and think, what can we do next? How can we enhance this? How can we embrace this? How can we develop this in a new way? I think was really fruitful in terms of their futures as designers going forward. And it's something that I can see will model through the rest of their careers, that they will always think upon, yes, I have kente, and yes, it's woven, but how can I make that weave wider? What colors can I add to that weave? Can I do it in a different thread, in a different texture? And these are questions that they possibly weren't asking themselves. They were just taking the fabric at face value and using it. But now they are thinking of the composition of the fabric and what it can actually enhance, or how it can grow in terms of technology and textiles. And I think that's great. It's always good to develop the traditions and the cultures that you find yourself within, but in terms of fashion and fast fashion right now, and embracing the handcrafted model that we are talking about, it's a great way forward in terms of research as well.
Yeah, so I'm conscious that time is, time's no longer on our side. So I want to encourage people to kindly, leave their questions in do we have a Q&A chat box? Well, in the chat group, on the chat, sorry, you can just leave your questions there, and then so we can start asking. So we're taking questions from the audience now. Thank you. So I'm super, I mean, not just me, I think for us as a platform, we see collaborative working as a tool for doing so much. So it's really quite interesting that we invited Yvonne to speak and invited Kirsten to speak as well. And you're already both working on a project. And of course, Sara, Maino is, the collaborator's collaborator, in the sense that it's something that, that she's done since inception. So looking at collaboration as a tool for growth, do you think the industry is doing enough in general when it comes to this? Should we expect to see more collaboration, and see how that creates a ripple effect, or, creates a ripple effect back within the educational system, where people start to understand that, like Kirsten mentioned in the beginning, that an interdisciplinary approach is probably going to strengthen the education system more than a mono approach. work in. Okay, we have our first question, I think. So do we?
Okay. Yeah, Zanne. Yeah, is asking, shall I read it?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, so Zanne says, I'm headed back to South Africa from Milan to start up a sustainable brand which works with the communities in order to empower them. Is there any key advice that any of you can offer to someone who is starting off with a business in this world of sustainability? Well, there's a lot, but I think already, well, congratulations to the fact that you're heading back and wanting to create this project towards communities and empower them. I think this is very important. I mean, not guess, but first of all, try to focus on which communities you are talking about. I mean, maybe you already have an idea or whatever. So this is already one question I would ask you, if you already have, you know, an idea of which communities you want to talk about and everything. And then for sure, I mean, try to understand if there are organizations in South Africa that already work with communities that could help out, you know, to understand of how to, you know, construct your business, because obviously this is not easy. I mean, just take an example, Omoyemi, you know him too, Simone Cipriani from Ethical Fashion. I mean, he's been, you know, working a lot with the empowerment of communities in Africa. So he for sure, I mean, I would suggest for you to go and see the website of Ethical Fashion, because that's already an example of how the empowerment of communities to work, you know, people that need. So I think you need to have a general review of what's happening, but for sure already focusing on who you want to help, and then try to, you know, try to get to know people that are sensible to your cause, and create, you know, a small team. At the beginning, it could be just you or someone else. But I mean, you know, to start the business, it's not easy. So even try to understand if in South Africa there are also economical support for this kind of projects, because usually there are. I mean, in Europe there are. So this would be, I don't know if Kirsten and Yvonne want to add something else. I mean, this is a general overview, obviously. I'm not giving too many.
I think one thing I would say, like we're saying, that the market is heavily saturated with brands and new brands and lots of different stories. But one thing I always tell my students is be true to who you are and what you stand for and what your brand stands for. If that's really clear, then you will be able to model everything you do around that. You have to have that story, that very, very clear from the start, what you stand for and why you're going to South Africa and what it is that you want to achieve.
When you develop your products, make sure that you have a really good, from a practical perspective, from my own experience, make sure that you have a really good prototype that you can leave with people, you know, good quality assurance, that kind of thing. And I've just put an image in the chat that I took actually at the Bethany Williams exhibition at the Design Museum in London yesterday. And it shows a model that she uses, and it's to do with profit sharing, going back to the charity. And that might be something to think about, that sort of additional incentive of profit sharing, you know, what that might look like to really sort of engage people. So it's not just sort of employment, which is great, but perhaps it becomes more than that, more of a cooperative kind of model in some way. Obviously, it's got to be financially sustainable as a business, but you know, what other kind of benefits can you build into it?
Thank you very much. And Zanne, I'm going to add a few more things. I believe in ensuring that, you know, you're well connected within the community that you hope to work in. You know, so I think you should check out Rewoven. They're based in South Africa. You should check out Fashion Revolution. There's a Fashion Revolution South Africa. They're very active as well. You should also check out TWYG magazine. I think they're an umbrella for different, like a platform. They have a website for dissemination of articles and different things, but they also organize events, host events. I think when you're plugged into your community as well, it goes a very long way, in helping you understand the nuances of the system you're working in and connect with people like yourselves. Sometimes it's usually as little as knowing you're not alone for you to keep going. So we'll go straight to the next question, which is from Ntha. I hope I pronounced it well. Ntimoah. Ntimoah is a designer. I crochet. I'm from Lesotho, based in Cape Town. Find it hard as a lawyer in the fashion industry, studied law, decided to pursue fashion, find it hard to navigate the space because most of fashion weeks or fashion shows are not as easy to get to or even know about, especially if you're not from a fashion school. How can one go about that? And Ntimoah, what is the question? How can you go about knowing about fashion weeks or navigating the space? I crochet garments from natural fibers, and I also find it hard to find customers or sustain the brand because I'm competing with bigger brands. And how does one identify their market? Also, one last thing, I grew up from Lesotho, a small country landlocked in South Africa, and I started the brand in Cape Town. I'd like to explore being a Pan-African brand because I have so much culture to share. How can I go on about being a Pan-African brand? Does anybody want to take that question? It's, I think, 3 in 1.
Yeah, I mean, the first part of the question, I mean, navigating a fashion space is very difficult, even with a fashion degree. I would try and do as many courses or learn as much as you can about the industry, because to go into the industry with a product and you want to get buyers and so on within the fashion industry, you need to know where you should be going, who you should be contacting, and navigating that space is very tricky. So if there's any sort of business fashion courses that you can go on locally, or any support at all that you can find locally within the fashion industry where you are, that would really help you, and it would take lots of the stress away from in terms of trying to find buyers. I think it's very important to educate yourself as much as you can about your industry locally.
Thank you very much. We'll go straight to the next question. I hope does that help you, Ntha?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll go straight to Sophie Zinga because I'm conscious about time. I recently launched a fashion hub in Senegal, which focuses on fashion design, education, and slow manufacturing. How can we reinvent fashion education on the continent? How important are scholars, research papers, and books that can inform fashion students on the continent? How can we collaborate more to reinvent the future of fashion education? I think it's already happening. I mean, for example, this is not a direct answer, but just speaking about collaboration, I think it's important that collaboration happens within us as stakeholders on the continent, but it's also important that, collaboration happens between us and the continent, cross-collaboration, cultural exchange, and it's similar to what Kirsten and Yvonne have worked on between the schools, between Marangoni, that's based in Istituto Marangoni in London, and of course Yvonne's school that's based in JCCAD, based in Accra, Ghana. So it's already happening, and I'm sure there'll be more like that across the continent. I don't know if anyone has more to add. Sorry, I'm not trying to reduce the question because I know this is very important and we can unpack this for hours. Yvonne, do you have anything to add to that? The question from Sophie Zinga, I think, is for you.
Okay, I'm kind of thinking of solutions that upcycling made. There's again, there's a lot around sustainability and upcycling of garments. What I would really say is to...
Sorry, Yvonne. Is the question from Sophie Zenga on Dakar Fashion Hub, from Dakar Design Hub.
Okay.
So how can we reinvent fashion education on the continent? How important are scholars, research papers and books? You know, I would say it's already happening. Sophie, you're already reinventing fashion education with the work that Dakar Design Hub is doing. But Yvonne, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say supporting the model of the new designers and the new generation, and listening to their voices and what it is that they want. If you are a hub, then and you obviously want to support these designers, then you have to listen to what it is that they need and creating opportunities for them. I think we touched upon it earlier on. What can we do to help the new generation? And I think the talent is there, the knowledge is there, but it's creating opportunities for them to show the world what it is that they can really do, and harnessing on their own voices and their individual style and talent and their way of communicating.
And I think, you know, we have to also think about strengthening the curriculum and bringing it up to date. You know, we've discussed in this group that even globally, the curriculum might be outdated because the fashion system is outdated. So imagine that, you know, if that's what the current state is around the world. So maybe it's time for, you know, since we're still in a place where we're developing our fashion education system, maybe we can sort of focus or concentrate on trying to get the approach right, you know, so maybe look at it more from a problem solving and systems design thinking approach, rather than, you know, solving, you know, how do we solve problems that exist, as opposed to just teaching them what we think they should know. So we have to, you know, I think that's also another way, or other ways of trying to reinvent fashion education on the continent. Sophie, I hope, and of course we need everybody contributing to that to make it happen. Sophie, I hope that helps answer your question.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Who wants to take Stephanie's question on the current context? We're thinking of solutions that involve reusing, recycling, upcycling. Anyone?
Just creating less and better. I think Sara said that earlier, you know, making things less and better, whether they're upside. I mean, that example I gave about by Waleed, you know, those fabrics are ancient and they're kept in use continually. He's covered in stitches that are backing fabrics that are quite delicate. So they find new uses, and quick heirloom garments that you don't want to throw away, or, you know, you pass them on, you keep them going. It is adding, but it's adding less. And if you are upcycling and doing it beautifully, you know, I know there's a lot of things which look a bit unresolved, shall we say, maybe through upcycling. But if it's done beautifully with real craft and curated items, then you can do really lovely things. And it is keeping those clothes from going into landfill, you know, or breaking them down, reweaving, patching, etc. I think a lot more can be done with that. And that isn't about new materials then, so it's less new materials. But it doesn't get away from the fact that the industry has to change unrecognizably, I think, and I think they're mostly in denial, and none of us know exactly how to get there. I think, you know, Sophie mentioned something about books, etc. I do think some books have a role to play. I've learned a huge amount from books about design as opposed to fashion design. I think the design disciplines are way further ahead in thinking about environmental issues and social issues, and designing for well-being, designing for psychological well-being as well as environmental well-being, you know, biophilia and things like that. They're way further ahead than the fashion industry on that. So I typed in a couple of books that have been really seminal books to me, and there's way more, but those ones popped into my head when I saw the word books. And books can seem like an alien thing and not necessarily part of, but I do think books are really just ideas, aren't they? and actually someone opening your mind to new ideas and then figuring it out. Well, what might this look like for me, for my community, for local resources and skills?
There's a few fashion technical books that will give you the stages of what a designer should do, and if you, especially for those people on the call who haven't been on a design course but still have brands, I'll look at the titles and so and send them on. I was just trying to get you some more references as we're talking, so I'll send them on to you if I can after this call.
Okay, just looking at the second half of that question on platform solutions encouraging made to measure rather than ready to wear, is that still relevant in our current context? Can you please explain what you mean by that? If you can please pop that in the group, we'll come back to it. Yvonne, there's a question for you from Uwase from Rwanda. Mm-hmm. She says, what is your opinion on the current state on fashion research on the continent, and how is it playing in fashion education?
Oh, we're lacking in research. I used to teach a course called Introduction to Fashion, and I realized very early on that course that the students weren't understanding the full context of the history of fashion, because what I was teaching them was westernized fashion. So I then decided, okay, alongside this, I'm going to teach them the history of African fashion. And I didn't realize that the task that I set myself was grueling, because I didn't have the same materials to back up the knowledge or what I wanted to tell them as the Western fashion. So there was a beautiful timeline of Western fashion from 1900 Victorian style up to modern day. But then when it came to African fashion, there were so many gaps that I had to fill myself. And this is in Africa can help, but we lack so much in terms of the historical documentation of textiles, for instance, and historical documentations of our fashions, and all of the creative sector, actually. So we need a great amount of input and support in terms of research. We are very lacking in research. And to grow these curriculums, these universities, these courses, research has to be at the forefront. And it's one area that could really, really help the industry. It's a merry-go-round. If we have research equals new knowledge equals input into industry, innovation, and so on. And that's how we grow. But the leaders or the people who can actually support the industry and make it grow do not have the same vision when it comes to research and innovation, and it's like bashing your head against a brick wall. It's very frustrating. So that's a really good question. Thank you. We're trying, we're helping. So hopefully you can input in that area as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Yvonne. Funke's question: generally, we do not talk much on the business of sustainability, being small and not looking for scalability. How do we maintain and cover our overhead expenses, which might also be economically driven, associated with the business? Sara, do you want to take that?
Okay, so what is the question? Sorry that I read it again.
The one from Funke. It says, generally, we do not talk much
on the business of sustainability, being small and not looking for scalability. How do we maintain and cover overhead expenses, which was okay, well, the thing is, going back also to what I was saying before, I mean, it's about the quality, not the quantity. So for sure, I mean, when you start your business, I think that you have to always give an overview of where you want to, I mean, which is your vision, which is your target, because obviously it's not just a matter of, building a brand and doing a collection. I mean, if you decide, to do a collection that you want to use upcycling, recycling of things that have, already present, which do not need to produce. I mean, just consider that, everybody's talking about how, I mean, I'm upcycling, recycling, but there's a whole process behind it, which is very complicated because, I mean, I've been into factories where they recycle and upcycle clothes, and there's such a long process, because it's not that you go to the market and you get a bunch of clothes and decided to, you know, upcycle it again, because then you need to cut the zip, you need to cut the sewings. I mean, there's so many elements that cannot be recycled, because I mean, polyester, but like the zips or the label, there's so many things that you need really to cut out. So you see these factories of people, and it's everything that can just be done handmade. It's not that you go like in a woven factory where there are machines that do everything, and you need to put, you know, the primary part of it. So I think that in general, you should understand at least, you know, the difference, what does this, you know, behave, the fact of doing an upcycle recycling collection, and going back to, you know, trying to keep it sustainable and economically sustainable. I think at the beginning, I always say, and it seems very kind of, I know this, but probably not, because people then do not really listen. Start really small. I mean, it's really, as I said, I repeat it, it's about the quality and not the quantity. Start with like, I don't know, you have an idea of like 6 recycled t-shirts because you love, I don't know, football. I'm just making an example. Just do special pieces and then go to friends, understand if they like it, understand how long it took for you to do this, how much it cost to you, what, you know, the time that you spent on it, because all of these are things that then when you start your label, you have to multiply for the quantity that you're doing, and you have to decide who you want to reach. You know, maybe you live in a big city, you want to reach your community where you live with, or maybe the school where you work. I mean, just do basics, you know, small focuses to start with, because that's the best way then to have feedbacks, and then largely, you know, enlarge and then slowly you can grow. At the same time, obviously, education is important. I mean, I was like during lockdown, and I don't know, for me, lockdown was in a way to stop and think about it. But I mean, as I said, maybe for the first 10 days, I mean, it's nothing nice to say, but it was like being on holiday, because everything stopped and I said, okay, what I'm gonna do? But in this time frame of not holiday, because then I worked 5 times worse than before, my time was kind of elastic. And I went on Coursera, which is this platform where there are so many online courses, and there are online courses which are kind of even not so expensive. Go in also there and, you know, see what you're missing and follow these courses, because these courses are very quick. They give you a very basic, you know, idea of your direction, and then think about if you want to go into depth in this, because I mean, there's so many things that you need to know about constructing a brand, and it's nothing that you can know from the start, everything. So just get your directions slowly, pace by pace. And this is my suggestion. I know I'm not giving you specific answer, but this is how it works.
And I think I'm just going to add to that, Funke, that really scalability is relative, right? Because sometimes when we think about scalability, we're thinking about the PVH corporations of this world. We're thinking about, you know, the big corporations that you completely lose sight of what their supply chain is and all of that. So sometimes when people say, you know, keep it small, they don't necessarily mean keep it to like 10 pieces or 20 pieces. I think keep it small is relative in the sense that, you know, for as long as, you know, your process is still traceable, there's still traceability within your supply chain. You know who's making what, you know, there's still transparency within your supply chain. It is ethical, you know. So from that point of view, so it's not necessarily a race to the bottom approach in terms of looking for the cheapest suppliers across the world and how you're contributing, you know, to increasing the global carbon emissions in the air, and, you know, where everything is so complex, you lose sight of, you know. So sometimes when those conversations come up, I don't really think it's in that. I don't really think they mean don't scale up like that. I think scalability is relative to being in control of your supply chain, to still being connected to your, you know, to the people who make the clothes, to the craftsmanship, you know, to ensuring that you keep everything yeah, everything as connected as should be, in a way that doesn't lose sight of the people who make the clothes, the environment, and, you know, ensuring that the process at the end of the day is it's designed to keep products in use for as long as possible. So we're running out of time, and Tensido, I apologize if I'm making, you know, I think first of all that today the big problem is a superficiality problem. Especially young people are very fascinated by all the hype stuff. Oh, that's a comment. Simisolu, I work with the Council for International African Fashion Education. We focus on the history of African fashion too. Yes, so there's a Council for International Africa Fashion Education. You should all, you know, go on their website as well, because they have, they will definitely have information for you on almost all the things we're talking about. Stephanie's come back. As made to measure is also a way to shop consciously and empower tailor artisans behind the clothes. Is creating platform solutions, encouraging people to shop made to measure fashion compared to buying ready to wear is still relevant, according to you, in the current context where fashion's future seems to be recycling, upcycling, reusing. Does anyone want to take that question? Stephanie, she's rephrased it. Oh, Kirsten, I think you've answered. I think made to measure is a sustainable way to shop in theory, which brings local benefits.
In theory, I mean, you know, if it's going to be a sea of polyester, then I'm not so sure, but it's definitely a shorter supply chain. I like the idea you have a relationship of some sort. You know who made your clothes, which is an important principle of fashion revolution.
Yeah. And Eka is asking, are there any recommendations for information / resources on African fashion history? So I think
I hate this. I'm sorry, because I have a call in 10 minutes, so okay. I'm gonna have to leave. I'm sorry about this.
No problem at all.
Just to let you know. Okay.
I think we're wrapping up anyway. That's the last question. Are there any recommendations for information resources? Eka, I think you should look on the CIAFE website, and then you should speak to Yvonne. Yvonne, please, do you want to pop your email address in the chat box so they can reach out to you? Yeah.
Yes, I'll put that in.
So I think that's all the time we have for questions today. And it's important that we say thank you to our speakers who've taken time out today out of their busy schedules to join us to sort of brainstorm on this. If you have any more questions, kindly reach out to us or reach out. Yvonne's popped her email address in the chat box as well. Please let us know if you have further questions or information. We'll be happy to ensure that we make this also available for people to watch at the end of today, or by the end of today. But thank you so much. I mean, I just want to say that as daunting as it might seem sometimes, the future is what we all make of it. The future is something that we all have responsibility to build together. So yes, any parting comments, last parting comments from our speakers before we round up or before we say goodbye?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the platform and the opportunity for these, all of these brands. I'm sure is knowledge well needed.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Always a good way to interact and exchange opinions. And also congratulations to people that have been participating, also asking interesting questions that makes us also think about what's your necessity and what are your doubts.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Omoyemi, and really interesting discussions, and great to hear from the other panelists as well, and great questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.